Hello, and welcome to another Optelec Enhanced Vision webinar. And today, I'm very pleased to say I'm being joined by Judith Potts, who runs Esme's Umbrella and it's a charity. Well, it's not actually a charity. It is an organisation to help people with Charles Bonnet Syndrome. And I'm also joined by Neil Nemec from the RNIB Scotland, and he's a sight loss advisor, and he's also going to give us his views on that one. So welcome to you both.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So what I'd like to ask first of all, Judith, is for those who don't know about the organisation, is to tell me what Esme's Umbrella is.
Well, Esme's Umbrella is, you're quite right, it's not a charity, it's a campaign which I launched 5 years ago at the House of Commons to raise awareness of Charles Bonnet Syndrome, because nobody seemed to know anything about it, and also to source funding for research into this condition, which is incredibly common, but very, very ill researched.
Okay. And in regards to how it's run on a day-to-day basis, can you give us some more information on that aspect of it?
Esme's Umbrella is only me.
Right, okay.
There isn't anybody else. A couple of people are very kind and do the odd bit of social media for me, but apart from that, it's just me.
Right, okay.
Over the past 5 years, I have written for endless publications, quite a few scientific ones. In fact, I'm about to do a second one for therapeutic advances in ophthalmology. They just invited me today to do that. Okay. I have spoken at endless events and really tried to raise that awareness so that people are not frightened that what they're living with, which are silent, vivid visual hallucinations, that they are not frightened that these are a mental health issue, because they're not. They're caused purely by loss of sight. So on a daily basis, as you know, the messages from the retina in the eye to the visual cortex in the brain keep going all the time. As sight diminishes, they slow, or if your sight goes entirely, they stop. But for some reason we don't understand yet, perhaps one day we will, the brain doesn't. The brain fires up and creates its own images. So what is seen depends on which part of the brain is firing at that moment. Oh. And the most important thing is that doctors, ordinary doctors like GPs and hospital doctors, have never heard of this. So it's essential that we explain to them what it is, so that if someone falls over and is in need of treatment, the hospital or the GP doctor doesn't instantly send them down the mental health route, which is an incredible waste of money apart from anything else. And also I need ophthalmologists and optometrists to warn their patients that as their sight diminishes, they might suddenly start to see something that isn't there. So that's been one side of it, which is raising awareness constantly in all sorts of different ways. Secondly, through the helpline, which I started 5 years ago, but a couple of years ago was overwhelmed with calls. So I had to take up the offer from the RNIB, Neil's organization, their eye health team, and we have a dedicated number which the eye health team answer for me. Now, if anyone wants to talk to me, they can. They will simply email me and I will call the person back. And I answer all the emails, all the Facebook messages over here and in Europe. I have someone in America who is a psychologist who works exclusively with the visually impaired, and he, bless him, has taken that load off me because I needed that. So then the other half, day to day, is me with my begging bowl, actually, trying to find money to fund research. And I've been fairly successful, I have to say. And once we're through lockdown, I will be announcing probably 5 pieces of research. So that's quite good.
Excellent, excellent. That's really good to know. So, from your point of view, Neil, in your role as a sight loss advisor, how often do you come across Charles Bonnet syndrome?
Right. Well, I deal with people every day, and who come to me with, with different inquiries about registration, all different aspects, benefits of ICE and stuff like that. But as you're going along, you have conversations with them, and they tell you things. And actually, just yesterday, actually, someone was telling me that she experienced the problem, and the thing she saw was like a carpet of flowers, in front of her, which is quite interesting because you do get repeated patterns coming up and stuff like that. But it just comes up in conversation, and I mean, sometimes folk, they wonder, they do worry about it. But I mean, when they speak to someone, you tell them what it is. It really puts their mind a lot more at ease. And
Yeah,
I've actually worked for RNIB for a long time before even the sight loss advice service in different roles. And you come across people all the time that suffer from it. And I mean, it does a lot of times, because of the way the condition works. I mean, they do know that things aren't real, and they do know it's hallucinations, but they
yeah,
still wonder if it might be something like mental health, or especially if people are older, whether it might be
Yeah.
Alzheimer's or anything like that. So I
yeah.
mean, it's good. It's good when they talk to it and you say, right, that's Charles Bonnet syndrome, and we know what that is, and then they know it's a recognised
Yeah.
condition. It makes you feel so much better.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And I'd agree with that. And I think actually, Judith, this is down to you since 2016, is you've really brought CBS to the forefront where it needed to be, because I've mentioned this in other conversations. From my point of view, I come across it a lot, almost. I would say almost probably 2 to 1 people I speak to either have it and are managing it, or have had it, because I think you've mentioned sometimes people, it does stop. For some people, it does discontinue, but other people's they do continue to have it, but they manage it. And like you said, Neil, I mean, the amount of variation from what one person sees to another it's astronomical.
It's
And that's the part that,
Yeah.
I suppose, with the brain, and everyone's brain wired differently, and how memories are implanted. It's something which sadly, as you said, doesn't get as noticed as much on that side. So you mentioned, Judith, the gentleman or the lady in America, but I also believe you also have a pretty a good working relationship with a certain doctor here in the UK as well. Can you tell me a little bit
yes.
more about that?
Yes, Dr. Dominic Fitch, his name is. It's a very unusual name. It's FYTCHE, and the first F is
Okay.
lowercase, not a capital. Yes, Dominic I discovered because when my mother, the Esme of Esme's Umbrella,
Yes.
started to talk about people sitting on her sofa and a child dressed in Edwardian costume that was following her everywhere, and a gargoyle-like creature, I had absolutely no idea what on earth could be wrong with her, and neither did she, although I have to say the word dementia did hang in the air. But I was very fortunate, and I read a tiny paragraph buried in the health pages of a newspaper about a condition caused by loss of sight, which could have been written by her. So I thought, okay, rang the ophthalmologist, wouldn't talk to me about it, GP never heard of it, optometrist never heard of it. So I went online. That is where I discovered Dr. Dominic Fitch. And at the time, I was writing a health column for the Telegraph. And I thought, I'm going to write about this.
Okay.
So I went to see him. And he is still the only person in the world who really understands CBS as much as anyone does.
Okay.
He said, yes, this is what your mum has. I'm sorry, there is no medication we can give her. My mum at that point was in her early 90s. and I am the only consultant. And I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. So after my mum died, having written so much about it and received so many emails from people desperate for help, I thought I really should do something. And so I said to Dominic, I'm going to launch a campaign, an awareness campaign. And he said, marvelous, that's what we need. And he has been utterly tremendous. At this precise moment, his clinic in King's is closed because of COVID-19, and he is somewhere on the COVID front line.
He's seconded elsewhere.
And I just keep my fingers crossed he will come back safely to us. But he answers all the really complicated questions. I can manage most of them. I can manage, as Neil can, the reassurance. But when people have, I mean, there was one today where somebody feels themselves moving at the same time. So it's like being on a roller coaster.
Okay.
I have no idea.
That's
so
a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, I have sent it to Dominic, and we'll see if he has a chance to respond. But he is an amazing man and has done the only research. In fact, Charles Bonnet lived in the 18th century. And in 1760, he documented what was happening to his grandfather. So, of course, in those days, it was the tapestries on the walls that were changing shape and colour, and there were carriages driving through the apartment in Geneva, and all sorts of things were happening. And he knew it must be sight, because his grandfather was perfectly lucid and sane. And so he documented that. And it wasn't until the 1990s that Dr. Dominic Fitch started his work on all types of visual hallucinations, including Charles Bonnet Syndrome. That was the first piece of research that was ever done.
It was that long from the initial wondering to, wow, that's amazing.
Because people didn't care, because the doctors didn't ask. People were so worried, they didn't say anything. And even now we have this problem that very often the ophthalmologists are not warning their patients. Because as Neil just pointed out, if you reassure someone and if you say, look, this is not very pleasant, but it's a normal side effect, you start off with a more positive feeling. But if you've hidden it for months and months and months, as my mother did before she said anything to me, it's much more difficult. And it's harder for the elderly, because cognitively, as we grow older, and I'm allowed to speak because I'm now 71, so I'm described as elderly, cognitively, you're slower to acknowledge that something is an hallucination and not a real snake or tiger or gushing water or whatever. But with younger people, it's slightly easier. I say slightly because in life find it incredibly difficult to sort of chat and have meetings, because there are always, as I think I said the other day, flowers growing from the head of the person opposite, or kitten lot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that leads me on to, and I don't know whether, are you both feeling that the internet is a little bit unstable at the moment? Or is it just me?
Unstable. Mine is fine this end.
Yeah, I think it might be mine. We'll carry on with it anyway. And so it's interesting that you're mentioning that, and actually you've kind of already answered, because I was going to actually say, who was Charles Bonnet, but you've already done that. You've beat me too, so that's great. In regards to the helpline, then, and again, obviously, Neil, you're more than welcome to comment on this as well. With the lockdown, and because of the mental side effects are clearly an issue, have you found an increase at all with the number of calls in the last 2.5 months?
The lady at the RNIB who runs the team of people that answer for the eye health team tells me that the number has doubled in the last 2 months. And I certainly have had many, many more emails and requests for information. And on Facebook too, there are various sort of groups about Charles Bonnet, and many more people are finding them and asking questions. And I think we've always known that isolation, stress, and fever exacerbate the episodes of Charles Bonnet Syndrome, or as some people call them, the events of the hallucinations. And this has been proven without any doubt at all. And it's become a kind of vicious circle, because it's stressful enough having the condition and learning to live with it. Particularly, some people have very, very frightening things anyway.
Yes.
But some people just have very distressing and annoying things, so that if they have a little sight and they want to watch television, they can't, because there are words or maps or musical notes that cover the whole screen. Or if they have enough sight to read a book, again, they can't, because the book is covered in splodges of color or something like that, and it gets in the way. Or even people standing in front of the television screen.
Yes.
So what we have also discovered is that Louise Gao at the RNIB tells me that, and I've discovered this too, what people are seeing now, they are more frightening images. So they've kind of gone from being annoying and distressing and disturbing to frightening.
Oh, right.
And that can only be the stress. Can only be the stress.
Yeah, the fact that they're sitting in the house and they've got nothing else to focus on either.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
So you think that is a definite possibility and side effect of having CBS anyway, that the stress of the lockdown has clearly made it worse, Neil, yeah?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Yeah, I agree, Neil.
I do feel that, I mean, also as well, like I say, that when you're sitting with nothing else to focus on, and also a lot of folk are quite, quite a few folk get down with this situation just now, not being able to go out and stuff like that. And I feel that probably has an effect on it as well, especially on maybe the types of images they're seeing and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's right, because there's not enough to occupy. Because the coping strategies that I have on my website and on my managing CBS information are, and I am obviously not a doctor, because what I'm about to say is in no way medical, but they kind of shunt the brain into another gear and switch off the cells that are firing. Okay. So, you stand up if you're sitting down, or you sit down if you're standing up. You click your fingers, clap your hands, reach out towards the hallucination, all that kind of thing. And then there are a couple of others which have arisen, which Dominic tells me are fine to say. People tell me if they eat ginger, or ginger biscuits, or drink ginger ale, or eat crystallized ginger, it helps the hallucination. So I said to Dominic, why would that be? He said, well, ginger has medicinal properties, so who knows why? But if it works, it's fine, and it's not going to do anything.
That is news to me as well. That's
one thing which has arisen, and also omega-3. People tell me helps. Now, who knows? It could be psychosomatic. Who knows? I don't care. Why? If it helps, that's all that matters.
No, I agree with you fully on that one. There's a lot of people ask us and me about certain eye conditions, and if wearing a certain colour filter will work, or if we're using a certain product will work. And I always say, hey, if it works for you,
absolutely. It doesn't. We don't have to prove anything. It just
no. I'm not going to pigeonhole anybody. I'm sure Neil would say from his own side, saying, if it works for the individual, go with it. Absolutely go with it, because we are proverbially in the dark, obviously, with this. There's still, as you say, if the NHS and many of the people within it not disregarding it, but just, shall we say, not being more informed about CBS, then and as patients, we go to these with maybe the expectation that they'll go, oh yeah, we know all about that. Sit down, I will tell you about it. So when they tell you from the professional point of view that, oh, not really aware of that one, then you go away thinking, is it me? Is it, am I going crazy? So, and that leads you back to you, Neil, is that it is so vitally important to raise that question with individuals. And even just from our company point of view, we generally, a couple of years ago, started saying to people, when we were visiting them in their homes for various demonstrations or whatever, it was we would subliminally sometimes bring that up, because and the amount of people who when we kind of asked the question, we didn't come out with it straight away and say, by the way, are you seeing hallucinations? It wasn't worded like that, but we did bring it out, and the amount of people who said, you know something, I haven't said this to anybody, not even my husband or my wife, but I've had this for several months now, and I had no idea what it was. I thought I was going crazy. So we see that. And like you were saying, you're on about the vast variation of hallucinations that are possible. I've not met anybody with the same one. They are the strangest things. But you've got to just, sit there and listen and understand and tell them that actually it is a side effect of sight loss.
It is. And it's a normal, I mean, it's horribly to say this, but it is a normal side effect of sight loss. But Dominic thinks there are probably at least 1 million people in the UK who live, and I think there are more, because every person like yourself, Paul, I speak to, and like you, Neil, say, oh, everybody I meet, and I think there's got to be more than 1 million. There's definitely got to be more than 1 million. But very much back at the queue, which is a shame. But it's interesting you say you've not come upon someone who's seen something similar. There are a few, because needless to say, I mean, they all come to me, so I've got a list.
I'm going to say you have the
so long of what people see. But there are a few things that come time and again. The child that my mother saw, people see wandering children quite a lot. And Lilliputian-sized little tiny people, little tiny armies of people, very often dressed in, for some reason, Tyrolean costume. The costume thing is interesting. Most of the time, if you see a person or an army or a group, they are dressed in some sort of costume.
Okay.
Now it can be Edwardian is quite common. You know, the ladies have the big hats, the lace up to the collars, and all of that. Military uniform, medieval uniform, medieval clothes, robes, and such like. That is also very common. And I did say to Dominic, what happens if you speak to someone in a country that they would not have ever seen an Oscar Wilde play or seen pictures of people in Edwardian costume or military costume? And he said they would describe exactly the same, not obviously using the words I've just used, but they would say the same thing. So it could be memory, but I think part of it is memory. Part of it is the brain, because if you spoke to a possibly someone who, I don't know, a herdsman or someone like that, who has this condition, they would describe the same, but they would never have the memories.
Of course.
Of the books. Because, I mean, a lot of the time, you can imagine if people see tigers are very common. In fact, I wrote today in the Yorkshire Post, there's a piece I wrote up. I interviewed a lady and she sees tigers quite a lot, either faces or the full thing. Now, most of us have never seen a tiger live. We've seen a tiger on television, possibly at the zoo, I suppose, but on the whole, not. So it's stored away in here from something that you saw on the television screen, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in many ways, it makes me wonder if, again, whether there's a correlation with dreams, because we all experience dreams that we can't. Sometimes you rarely remember a dream. You wake up and remember the dream. Most of the times we don't, but some of the dreams that can be so vivid. And again, ultimately, that's your mind.
That is your mind. I think Dominic gave me a very complicated scientific explanation about the difference between the two. Don't ask what it is, because I can't remember.
I was going to ask you what it was.
Very complicated, but I think he would say they are different.
Yeah.
Mechanically different.
We'll send you the details later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it is it is an awful syndrome, but it is also at the same time a fascinating how it is and how it manifests in people with similar eye conditions. I'd say personally, I've only really spoken to people with advanced macular degeneration, but like you've mentioned, it can affect people with other various sight loss, retinitis pigmentosa, etc., diabetic retinopathy. But also, I didn't realize, as I say, it can affect children. Now, that aspect, that must be even harder to find out, because an example of 4 or 5-year-old child, vivid imagination anyway, imaginary friends. How would you even begin to separate where one starts and the other one stops?
Yes, well, with great difficulty, but I have sourced £15,000 from the Thomas Pocklington Trust for a doctor called Dr. Maria Musaji at Moorfields. She is a geneticist, and she's also a consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields and Great Ormond Street.
Okay.
So she's a pediatric ophthalmologist too. And she and her team are going to do a study to see, first of all, how many children have it. We know we've got a long list from Moorfields, so we know there are, but we need to know more. And we also need to know much more about how it affects them and how you discover, as you said, how do you identify that this is not an imaginary friend or just the vivid imagination. But I got very concerned, because I used to get phone calls from mothers who would say, who were terribly upset, and they would say, for months I've been telling my daughter, would you stop lying? There's nothing there. Would you stop telling lies? I now realize that actually she's not, that there is something there. And I've looked it up, and I think this is what it might be, but I can't find anything about children. So that has been very much one of my wishes, and it has now at last come true. So I'm very pleased about that, because I think the children will go from tiny tinies all the way up to, I suppose, 20, 21, that kind of age. Because Dominic said, even if you've had sight for sort of 6 months, the brain has seen something. Now, the problem with that is that if you lose your sight at, say, a year, you don't know so you saw a cow, but you don't know it's a cow. And how do you describe it afterwards? So that is a complication, and I don't know how they'll get around that. But for children who lose their sight later, sort of 10, 11, 12, there is a condition, Stargardt's.
Yes.
I think, where they lose their sight that sort of age. And I've spoken to several people who around about 11, 12, 13 suddenly started to see things. And then, of course, they say nothing for exactly the same reason as adults, because they think they're going mad, and are too frightened to say anything, even to their parents. So I've just been speaking to the people at the, there's a college, a VI college in Hereford. Okay. And It's from 16 to 25, I think. But I thought, well, it's a start, isn't it? If we could get into there and talk to them, because there may be lots of them who are not saying a word.
So for Neil, from your point of view then, based as you are in Scotland, from the children's aspect, are you finding, again, more children with this condition as well? Or in your particular role, is that not something that you see that much of?
Not noticed it that much, to be honest. I don't tend to go into the the subject in that much detail, but I think the fact is that I actually cover the whole. I'm part of the Sight Loss Advice Service, which covers the whole country, both Scotland, England,
Yeah, of course,
and the other countries. So it would be hard for me to get an actual.
I just find it interesting, and that it would be interesting, Judith, to know the outcome of that particular thing, because, like you say, it's the younger. I mean, I know from just a personal trying to assess a 4 or 5 year old child with sight loss with an appropriate product that's going to help them. Asking them to use even an optical magnifier at the correct working distance is so difficult.
Of course,
because they're just at that age they're too interested in being out in the yard and schoolyard, which is totally totally fine.
Yes.
So I know that that side of it is difficult to get across. So that would be interesting on that side. And again, I go back to really how the NHS sees it or doesn't see it in that case. But in your opinion, moving forward with these type of talks that you will continue doing, how best would it be for all our organisations within the sight loss sector to help you more do that? And I fully appreciate the RNIB helpline is playing now a massive part for the last couple of years, but what more can we do?
Well, if I could get everyone in the sector to band together and approach the NHS, we might get some specialist nurses, which is one of the things I was talking to Moorfields and the Manchester Eye Hospital about.
Okay.
Specialist nurses who work like Macmillan nurses do for people with cancer, because they could then liaise between the patient, for want of a better word, the patient, the family, the ECLO, the ROVI, if necessary, the social services, as they do for people with cancer. But we also need more of Dominic. I mean, I always joke that we ought to clone Dominic, and actually, if the NHS could do that, we could do it probably. I should have thought about 25 or 30 Dominics, and then we'd be fine.
I think we need to do that with the NHS as a whole.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. But the thing is that last year, I managed to persuade the World Health Organization to include CBS in ICD-11, which is their taxonomy of diseases and conditions. Now, because it's there, the NHS now has a duty to create a proper pathway for diagnosis, treatment, and support. Because at the moment, diagnosis is usually done by me, or if it can be done by an ophthalmologist, in the worst cases, Dominic will take over. But there's a long waiting list for him, and you have to fill in these forms, which are different in every part of the country. So it's the postcode lottery as to who gets to Dominic. And there are all sorts of clauses about research and medication that's been tried and all this sort of thing. Well, there isn't any. None of this exists. So the first two hurdles, the CBS patient falls at immediately, because there is nothing we can offer. So we need it taken seriously. We could do, I think, with some psychologists, because I think one of the things the NHS says is, but we've got to rule out things before we can rule it in.
Yes.
But, which is fine, but what you need is a specialist psychologist or a team of specialist psychologists to rule it out. Not the long mental health pathway that involves all sorts of things before you actually get there. By that time, the distress is quadrupled, and the Charles Bonnet Syndrome hallucinations have got far, far worse.
Absolutely, manifested far worse.
Someone in the hospitals, Dr. Maria Musaji said this 5 years ago. She said to me, what we need is a multi-skill or multi-whatever team. So we have a psychologist working with the ophthalmologist so that quite quickly you can establish. Now, it is entirely possible to have Charles Bonnet Syndrome and, say, Lewy body dementia, which also has hallucinations at the same time. But you need someone to be able to say that.
Yes.
Or to say, no, it's not, it's entirely Charles Bonnet Syndrome. And then that's what we need. We need the NHS to, work properly. But when I spoke to one of the commissioners, well, first of all, I had to explain Charles Bonnet Syndrome to her because she'd never heard of it. So that took some explaining. Then she said she'd have to go away and think about it, and it would take her 4 weeks to think. So after 4 weeks, she did ring me back, to be fair to her, and she said, no, I have looked this up. Clearly, she thought I'd invented the whole thing. No, I have looked this up, and yes, it does exist. And then she said, well, she talked in gobbledygook, actually, for a long time. But then she said, so I think we'll try a local pilot. I said, marvellous. Why don't we choose a London borough? Because that's where I live. And I thought I could help out. And she said, no. Local doesn't mean that. And I said, well, what does local mean? I can't tell you what she said because I didn't understand it. It was a little bit like watching, did you ever see 2012 or W1A, the BBC wonderful comedies about the BBC? Yeah, it was exactly like that.
Okay.
Her speak was impossible to understand. And I've never heard another word from her. No. So we've got to get, I mean, I know it's difficult now because COVID obviously has to take priority. I get that. But we've got to get people seen, because now I don't know whether once we are out of lockdown and back to any form of normality, whether people's CBS is going to fade away and back to where it was, or is it going to stay? We don't know.
No, and that is a problem, and like you say, that is why it's vitally important to get awareness out of Charles Bonnet Syndrome out there to as many organisations, like the NHS. Obviously, the charities are more than aware of it, the national charities and the local charities, and also from our point of view as suppliers to both charities, NHS, and the individuals. So, there's a long way to go, but at least. I mean, I think people like yourselves at Optilec, great. Let us get together and lobby. Now, obviously, we can't do it yet. We have to wait for COVID to hopefully go. Yes. So, the start of next year. It's such a shame because this is 2020, year of vision for obvious reasons. Yeah. And I had. Oh, so many plans. Well, we all did, didn't we? We all did. Yeah. But you're right. They're just on the back burner, and COVID, like other things, hopefully it will go at some point, and we can get back on track. But and then I want to gather everyone together and absolutely just let us all, let's write a letter and let's have everybody sign it. We'd certainly a list of other companies to go to. Absolutely, and we'd certainly join you on that one because we think it's vitally important as well. So, I'd like to thank you for your time. It's been insightful to get this information. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully, you have too. And it's been great. We can continue this further on. And if you would you like to give your details just out in the broadcast, your email address, contact telephone, anything like that, and same again for yourself, Neil? I have to look it up. I can never remember the phone number. It's okay. The helpline number is 0207 391
3299. And my website is www. And then Charles Bonnet is Charles Bonnet with only one T. So Charles Bonnet Syndrome, all lowercase, no dot. So www.charlesbonnetsyndrome.uk. There's no co in there, it's just .uk. Because I'm a campaign, not a charity.
No, of course, of course.
My email address is esmesumbrella, no apostrophe, no dots, esmesumbrella@gmail.com.
Excellent, wonderful. And Neil, we all know the RNIB's address on that side with all the relevant information. So again, once again, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Paul.
But just one final thing to say, that if anyone's got any questions or queries about their eye conditions at all, or anything they're worried about, then they can call our helpline number, which is 0303 123 9999. Okay, that's the general RNIB helpline number. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Wonderful. Okay, and we will stop the recording right there.